off to his wife that he and his wife were riding on one of their all-terrain vehicles, and she spotted what she thought was probably a mannequin in the bushes, only visible from the vantage point of being inside the field as opposed to on the road. And when they investigated, they saw this young girl's body. Well, no one knew who the body was. And by July 25th, in the mid-morning hours, an officer, Graybo, from the Kenosha Police Department, is dispatched to the McDonald's on Green Bay Road. The McDonald's that Olivia also works at. She works at the Taco Bell and the McDonald's. Works both jobs. And he comes there because 2 bags have been brought to the McDonald's. And they had been found dumped on Washington Road, basically just on the roadway. And in there was a McDonald's uniform. And so the McDonald's came to find this out, and so now the police are called, and one of those bags has the name McKay on it. And the people at McDonald's know that Olivia McKay works there, and these are her bags, and so the police are called. And now, for the first time, the parents are called. Both parents compare notes. Neither parent has seen Olivia McKay for more than a day. And now the search is on. Missing was Olivia's vehicle. Missing was her phone. Her phone had been off for a period of time, hadn't been on since the 24th. Her car had not been found. And finally, the family members find her vehicle parked down by the lake on July 25th on 5th Avenue, 3800 block. They find her vehicle, and you'll hear officers testify about a fateful moment when the parents bring a spare key, and a decision has to be made about opening the trunk of that vehicle to see if Olivia may still be in there. And she is not. She's already been found in a farmer's field, and now that identification can be made. The scene has a body of a young woman. Kenosha has a missing young woman. And the identification is made. Inside the vehicle, the owner's manual, the warranty booklet, which had previously been in the glove compartment, are now strewn in the back seat. The car is no longer adjusted for Olivia's height to drive. It's adjusted for a higher height, for a taller individual to drive. And so this vehicle is processed for fingerprints and other scientific evidence to see if it will in some way link, if any of the items in it will link to anybody, if any suspects are developed. And on the 25th, Dr. Leinert did an autopsy. He's a Milwaukee medical examiner. He'll testify in this case. You'll hear him offer the medical opinion that Olivia McKay died because of pressure put on her neck and throat muscles. In other words, manual strangulation of some kind that caused her to cease being able to breathe and so die. And it was of a force that there was petechia, meaning blood vessels were popping in places like her eyes. You'll talk about a lump or a bruising to a part of her head as well. It looks like a blunt force trauma strike of some kind. And he'll tell you that the cause of death of Olivia McKay is, in fact, strangulation. Now, one of the things the court will instruct you, at the end of this case is that you may be allowed to use the testimony of 3 additional women to talk about modus operandi. In other words, is there an individual in this case who, as a way that he participates with women who he's interested in having either sexual relations with or is interacting with, is there a person in this case who has used choking or an interest in choking in the past? And you will hear Samantha Whitaker and I believe Amanda Hanneman say that during sexual acts with the defendant in relationships they had with him, that he choked them in a consensual fashion. They did not, believe that anybody was attempting to kill them, but that was something he was interested in. And a third woman, Sarah Rantanen, will also indicate that he requested to be allowed to do that with her, and that she refused. From the state's perspective, it will be of direct relevance to you if you wish to consider it on the issue of the way that Olivia McKay died. So we're going to talk about in some detail, via some testimony from witnesses who did subpoenas for both the records from the Meet Me app and from Facebook records. You'll hear that certain of those Facebook conversations were deleted by the defendant, so that they were no longer present on his records, but that because we were able to look at Facebook records from the other side of those conversations, we were still able to discover those interactions. You will hear that those Facebook records and Meet Me applications have the things I've talked about. There are also multiple contacts with other individuals that the defendant knows where he is actively trying to sell Olivia McKay's vehicle within hours after her death. He is taking pictures of Olivia's vehicle and offering it to sale within hours after her death. He is bringing her vehicle to potential buyers and showing it to one of those within only hours after her death, with his co-defendant, Jamari Cook. You will hear that the defendant was arrested on August 3rd, so approximately 10 days after the death of Olivia McKay. That Jamari Cook, the co-defendant, was also found by law enforcement, and he was asked to come in, and Jamari Cook was transported in by his mothers, his stepmother and his mother. And you'll hear testimony of an interaction where his stepmothers told Jamari Cook, tell the truth. Be sure you tell the truth about what happened here. And you'll hear Jamari Cook testify in this court. And Jamari Cook will tell you that the defendant and I had a cover story. That in the days after this happened, we had agreed that if anybody ever questioned us, we would say that this woman had contacted the defendant, but that she had stood him up, or that there had been the briefest of all interactions. And Jamari will tell you that in loyal friendship, when he first went down to law enforcement, he stuck to that story for a few minutes. And that he knew because he had been present with the defendant when the defendant was arrested that day as well. You'll hear Jamari Cook say, eventually law enforcement said to me that they were talking to the defendant, that the defendant had already had already talked to them about the beach, and that Olivia was down at the beach. And also that Jamari was present there. And then law enforcement told Jamari that the defendant was telling them everything that happened. Jamari will tell you that in his interaction with the defendant, the day that he was arrested, had been talking about how he planned to turn himself in. So when Jamari heard that this man who said he was going to turn himself in was now telling law enforcement about the beach, was now telling law enforcement that Jamari had been there, that he was no longer sticking to the cover story, that Jamari assumed that the defendant was actually telling what really happened, which was that this defendant, Daniel Tate, ended Olivia McKay's life on the beach that night. Jamari Cook will tell you he didn't think he was telling on the defendant because he assumed the defendant was telling the truth at that time. So Jamari will tell you, here's what happened. Jamari Cook will tell you that he had a fight, Jamari had a fight with his girlfriend, and that his best friend in the world was the defendant, Daniel Tate. And if either of them didn't have a place to stay on any given night, they found the other one, and the other one made arrangements. So you'll hear Jamari Cook say, I showed up at Danny Tate's house, the defendant's place, like I would any time, depending on my best friend. And I get there, and it's after 9 p.m., and the defendant tells me I'm about to meet up with this woman that and basically briefly talks about his interaction on me. And so Jamari is thinking, okay, well, now what am I going to do? And the defendant says, well, you come. And so Jamari says, all right. And so you'll see in the interactions that the defendant actually asks Olivia, is it okay if I bring somebody, a guy? And she says, sure. So Jamari will say that Olivia showed up in the vehicle in question at the defendant's grandma's house where the defendant was staying, that the two of them got into her car, that they asked her permission, could they smoke in her car? She said yes. That it was kind of awkward. That he recognized, this is Jamari Cook, recognized Olivia McKay because he had also been in Indian Trail at the same time she was. He didn't know her well. I'm not even sure he knew her name, but he recognized her. And they did briefly speak about that. He and Olivia briefly spoke about that. And then Olivia drove them to Racine, to the lakefront. They were there a very short while. And then Olivia drove them back to Penoyer Park, where the band shell is. Right at our lakefront. And Jamari Cook will tell you that they got out of the vehicle, all three of them, that it was only three of them, that they walked out to the lake, that at this time of night there was, the lake had a sort of a pool in the sand. So there was a pool in the sand before you got to where the lake is continuous. That they were walking in the sand on the beach area. That it appeared to Jamari Cook that Daniel Tate was attempting to now get closer or begin to get somehow romantic perhaps with Olivia. And so he separated himself a little bit of a distance and attention-wise, essentially to give them their space. But you will hear Jamari Cook say, within a very short period of time, his attention was directed back over to where the defendant and Olivia were. And he saw his best friend, the defendant, with Olivia in a stranglehold. And this occurred for a while. And then she went down on the ground. And more strangulation of her occurred on the ground. I believe he'll tell you that she was hit with an object by the defendant at one point. Her head was held underwater. He has no idea if she was alive or not at that point. variety of things were done to her in that pool involving strangulation, and that he saw that occur. And Jamari Cook will have no reason for you why he didn't step in. He'll have no excuse for you why he didn't attempt to save a life. In fact, he will tell you that the next thing he did was, when the defendant was dragging Olivia's body from the sand back to the parking space, that he assisted with the trunk, that he assisted in putting her body inside the trunk of her own car, and that Jamari Cook, at the defendant's request, drove Olivia's vehicle from the scene. You will hear Jamari Cook admit to you that he did those things, and admit to you that then the defendant went through the glove compartment, essentially throwing things in the back as he was doing so, that the defendant began to talk to him about how they'd be able to sell this car, and he'd get in touch with his girlfriend, who was currently in Wheaton Franciscan Hospital in Racine, and she knew people, and she'd be able to get this vehicle sold. And essentially, Jamari was being told to drive Olivia's vehicle with Olivia's body in it to Racine. And Jamari will tell you what the path was that he took. And he will say, I'm the one who adjusted the seat. I'm the one who touched the mirror. I'm the one who did that to drive this vehicle, which I believed I was helping my friends sell. And you will hear Jamari Cook say that as they get into Racine, the defendant has them pull over and they use Wi-Fi. And when they use Wi-Fi, the defendant then tells Jamari, we can't go see her. She's not able to help us. Essentially, plan A, go to a hospital in Racine with this vehicle, is off. And then the defendant directed him to a few more turns, and they're on a rural road in the middle of nowhere, and you will hear Jamari Cook say that the defendant then took out a backpack that he had with him, and then he took out from that backpack a pair of surgical gloves and put those hospital gloves on his hands. And then he took from that backpack 2 garbage bags, and they opened the trunk, and the 2 of them put those bags on Olivia's body. And you will hear that Jamari told officers at the time, I put the lower bag on her, the defendant put the upper bag on her. And we both carried her, and we had to carry her around some bushes and trees, and we left her there, and we drove away. And he will tell you the defendant then drove, wearing gloves, from that location back to Kenosha, where they both then parked the car a little distance from where they were and kept the keys. And you will hear Jamari say that on their way back into town, they found 2 bags of essentially suitcase-type bags of Olivia's, and they threw those out of the vehicle as they were driving. Well, after they had made it to Kenosha. And that her phone was thrown out during this trip because her phone had been left in the vehicle. You will hear that then Jamari Cook will say, I, using Olivia's vehicle, picked the defendant up the next morning. And using Olivia's vehicle, I drove him to Wheaton Franciscan Hospital in Racine. and we then interacted there for a while, and then I participated with him in going to the Knights Inn Motel in the Racine area as well, in Mount Pleasant, and attempted to sell the car. And then finally we abandoned the vehicle by driving it back to Kenosha and abandoning it in the very location where Olivia's relatives found it on the 25th. You'll hear about the physical evidence that was analyzed in this case. And you'll hear that when they did the fingerprint testing on the items talked about, that the fingerprints of Jamari Cook are found on that rearview mirror, and they are found on the bag that was used to bag the lower part of Olivia's body. So Jamari had told us that he had touched that lower bag without gloves before those fingerprints were even found. Remember that Jamari says the defendant was wearing gloves.
Over here.
No fingerprints of the defendants are found on the bags. Again, the evidence would be based on Jamari, he's wearing gloves. But Jamari says the first time the defendant put gloves on was once we got to this remote location in Racine. So when the defendant rifled the glove compartment and was looking at what was in the glove compartment, he didn't have gloves on yet. You will hear from the State Crime Lab, you'll hear based on information that you'll be presented from the State Crime Lab, that the defendant's fingerprints are on one of the items found in the back seat that had been in the glove compartment, and that is that warranty book. So his actual fingerprints, or fingerprint, is on that book in Olivia's vehicle. You will hear that some search warrants were done in this case. You'll hear that in those search warrants, that first a search warrant is done on the defendant's grandma's home, where he was staying the day Olivia came to pick him up. And you'll hear that the room that he was staying in was the living room, the couch in the living room. And you will hear testimony from officers that found in that living room, the same room the defendant is staying in at the time this incident happened, is in fact a pair of hospital gloves. They're on the floor, they've clearly just been thrown over to the side, and they are inside out, the same way they would be if you simply pull them off your hands. Those are found at the grandmother's home, on the floor, in the room the defendant is staying. You will hear as well that in the kitchen, under the sink of Grandma's home, there is found an open bag, box of garbage bags. And you will hear that when those open box of garbage bags are looked at, and the remaining bags are looked at, they are a set of garbage bags of a very particular size with a pale yellow pull tab. And then when we go back, when officers go back and look at the bags used to bag the body of Olivia McKay, that those are identical in size, identical in color garbage bags that also have a pale yellow pull top. So they match perfectly with garbage, with the opened container of garbage bags in the residence the defendant was staying at that very day. That he put together a backpack with garbage bags and hospital. You will hear that a search warrant was done at the defendant's father's home, where I believe you will hear he was staying at least some of the time after the homicide and just before his arrest. And at that search warrant, I believe you will hear that there is a picture of a red backpack, and that may be a backpack that Jamari cook is able to say he looks like the backpack that I saw those items in on the day of the homicide. You will hear about what the defendant told law enforcement about this incident. You'll hear that the defendant, when he was brought into custody, agreed that his name was the correct one, that they were using to trace these records of this interaction with Olivia McKay, that he confirmed what his Facebook page was, confirming that the Facebook conversations that they found were in fact him, that he agreed that no one had hacked his account, that no one had used his account for any purposes in any situation he was not aware of. And then you will hear that they asked the defendant, who's the last person that you met on this Meet Me application? And you will hear the defendant say that it was a woman named Zena, and he gives her last name. And then you will hear that officers confronted the defendant and said, we're getting records. There's no reason to lie to us about this. We are going to get the information. So why don't you tell us who the last person you had interaction with was? And at that point, the defendant says, okay, now I remember it's a person who was named Olivia. And as they continue to further interact with him, he recounts that she has a four-door car, that she told him she was 16 or 17, that her hair was brown. He goes on to describe her. He describes her as somebody, I wasn't really interested in her. We had virtually no interaction. So then they confront him again. And now the defendant says, all right, she did come over, we interacted, we were just in her car at my grandma's house, we never went anywhere. And then officers say, well, how sure are you going to be that there's no video at the band shell? We have this problem with graffiti down there, and vandalism, and how are you really sure that we don't have video down at the band shell? And then he says, next version, well, yeah, we did go down and park at the band shell. And who was along? Well, myself and her and Jamari, but we were just down there a few minutes. Did you ever get out of the car? Never. Did Jamari ever get out of the car? Never. Did Olivia ever get out of the car? Never. How long were you there? Just a very few short minutes. And then they confront him again. And now, a few minutes later, the defendant says, okay, we did get out of the car. We were parked at the beach, we got out of the car. Jamari and I went to interact with one person, and Olivia was off, not with us. Then, they continue to press him, and the defendant finally says, okay, another person did show up. And that person's name is Andrew, and he gives a specific name of a real person. He gives his last name. This is not a generic, hey, just some mysterious stranger came. He names a person that he says came down. And the officer's asking more, and he says, well, okay, I did see this Andrew choke Olivia on the beach. And as they begin to ask him, well, what are, how did she get bagged up and all that, the interview was over. So, one of the things you're going to hear is evidence that this actual specific person who the defendant named is a person Jamari says, that's a guy that the defendant has been feuding with for years. Every time he gets in trouble, he pretends that that's the guy who did it. And that guy was not only not on the beach, he has nothing to do with this case. And you will hear from that individual, Andrew himself, and Andrew's grandfather, that he had nothing to do with this case, wasn't even around when Olivia died. So you will be able to assess why someone would blame an actual other human being if they were not involved, if they were not a party to what happened here. Ladies and gentlemen, when you see the physical evidence, when you hear Jamari Cope testify about what happened in this case, when you hear about the other individuals who will talk about what the defendant did before the murder and after the murder, the state believes you will have an opportunity to think about both theories before you. The defendant directly committed this homicide and or that he assisted in. And in either case, the state will ask you at the close of evidence to find the defendant guilty of party to the crime, homicide, car theft, and hiding the corpse or the body